Hi everyone, and welcome to Horror Spectator. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We dive deep into the darkest, most chilling real-life horror stories out there. And if you're a returning viewer, I'm so glad to have you back, friend. In this video, we're diving into two stories of families who headed into the Appalachian Mountains during the summer, expecting peace, family time, and a break from everything. But what they got was something else entirely. Both stories involve families who own property in the mountains, and what should have been a time of connection and joy turned into something absolutely terrifying. To this day, neither story has a clear answer, and the families involved are still searching for some kind of explanation for what really happened. Thank you so much for being here and supporting the channel. I really hope you enjoy this video as much as I enjoyed making it. If you've got any theories, drop them in the comments. I might not always get the chance to reply, but I read every single one, and they help the channel a ton. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's head back into the mountains. And remember, viewer discretion is advised. The story I'm about to tell you isn't a happy one. It's depressing, and it destroyed my family's life. So if you're not in the mood to hear something dark, this is your warning. It's a story I'm only now able to share because only now do I feel ready, even though so many years have passed. Every summer, when we were kids, our parents would drop us off at our grandparents' place deep in the cranberry wilderness of West Virginia. If you don't know it, back then it was a completely forgotten part of the country. Honestly, I still think it is, though I can't say for sure. I haven't set foot there in 22 years, and I don't plan to ever go back as long as I'm alive. It was a remote stretch with no cell service, no neighbors, and no towns for miles. Their cabin sat near the headwaters of the Williams River, more than an hour off Route 39 down a winding gravel road that most folks avoided all year round, but especially in the summer. The nearest town with a grocery store was Richwood, and even that felt like a piece of civilization you had to earn. My grandfather built the cabin himself in the late 60s. 2 stories, rough-hewn logs, a steep metal roof, and a massive stone chimney. It looked like something out of a painting. Beautiful, sure, but quiet in a way that could crawl under your skin. Out there, the woods aren't just around you. They press in from all sides, thick and dark, like they're holding their breath. It's the kind of feeling only people who've lived there, or stayed long enough, can understand. This happened 22 years ago. I was 12. My brother Ben was 10, and our sister Molly had just turned 6. It was early July, hot during the day, cool at night, with thick clouds of mosquitoes that came out as soon as the sun dipped behind the ridges. Our parents were on some couples retreat in Asheville for 4 days, and like always, they dropped us off with enough board games and bug spray to survive a week in the woods. My siblings and I loved those moments. It always felt like stepping into an enchanted forest, and our grandparents were the guardians of some ancient secret. Even though they couldn't read or write, they were incredibly wise when it came to living in the woods. They could read the forest like a book, and that was all they needed to be happy in that place. The first 2 days we stayed that summer were normal. We played checkers, hiked the trails behind the cabin, and helped our grandfather chop firewood for the outdoor stove. We watched fireflies at night and slept with the windows open, listening to crickets and the occasional whip-poor-will echoing through the trees. Since the area was thick with mosquitoes and the windows were always open, our grandparents had bought us nets for our beds. Mine was black, just like I asked for. And at night I'd pretend I was in a castle, a knight defending his fortress. those were good times. And I still have beautiful memories, until that year. On the third day, the weather turned fast. Around noon, the sky went dark like someone flipped a switch. You could feel the air shift, heavy and tense. The shortwave radio crackled out a storm warning, and possible flash flooding. Nothing out of the ordinary for a West Virginia summer, at least back then. But in a place that far off the grid, it was something to take seriously. I remember clearly seeing my grandparents grow tense and worried. My grandfather double-checked the windows, brought in the last of the dry wood, and made sure all the lanterns were full. By late afternoon, the sky opened up. Thunder cracked so loud, it rattled the floorboards. Rain came in waves, blinding, hard, relentless. I had never seen that kind of power come from the sky, and at that moment, I understood why so many people believed in gods. The power went out just after dinner. We lit candles and sat by the fireplace. Nobody talked much, not just because we were all a little scared, but because we were trying to listen to the storm swallowing the woods outside. That night, we all slept downstairs in the living room. It was cooler, and the storm sounded worse up in the bedrooms. Around 1 a.m., I woke up thirsty and went to the kitchen to get some water. On my way back, I walked past the big front window and froze. There were footprints, muddy and clear as day, right there on the porch. My brain was trying to process what I was seeing as fast as it could. And when it finally did, it scared me more than the storm itself. Those prints weren't ours. I was sure none of us had stepped outside since dinner. They were fresh. Just one set, barefoot. Walking across the porch from the steps to the far side of the cabin. They were so fresh that I could literally watch them fading into the rain as I stared at them. With how hard it was raining, those prints couldn't have been there for more than a minute. I stood there frozen, trying to make sense of it. Was someone out there watching me through the window? The thought made my skin crawl and I turned back toward the living room. I didn't wake anyone. I don't know why. I was a kid, and even though I was clearly terrified, some part of me knew that if I woke my grandparents and told them, it would make it real. So I went back to the spot where I'd been sleeping and tried my hardest to forget. Eventually, I fell asleep. The next morning, everything was soaked. The ground was thick with mud and standing water. You couldn't even see the trail down to the creek anymore. My grandparents tried to keep us inside while they went out to check the property, but they knew there was no way to hold back 3 curious kids. So they gave in and let us go with them. The first thing I did was inspect the porch. The prints were obviously gone, washed away like they never existed. We stuck close to the cabin all day. The trails were a mess, and the air was heavy and humid. The kind of stillness that lingers after a storm like that. But what really bothered me was how different my grandparents seemed. More tense during the day than they had been the night before. I remember thinking that was strange. The storm had passed, the damage wasn't too bad, and yet both of them were nervous, on edge. I asked if everything was okay. They both said yes. But later that afternoon, my grandma looked at me and clearly saw something was up. She asked me if I'd seen anything during the night. I couldn't lie to her. She always knew when I was lying. So I told her the truth. I said I'd gotten up to get water and had seen footprints on the porch. Her face changed instantly. She turned white as a sheet, like all the blood had drained from her body. My grandpa, on the other hand, stayed still, but he went and got his old shotgun and didn't let it out of his hands for the rest of the day. I asked again if something was wrong, if everything was okay, but I didn't get a real answer. They just told me everything would be fine and that I needed to help take care of my siblings. They told me not to tell Ben or Molly what I'd seen and to keep an eye on them. That night, my grandparents said the three of us, me, Ben, and Molly, would sleep in their bedroom. They told my siblings it was more comfortable for us that way. But I knew there was another reason. And that was enough to kick my curiosity into high gear. At the time, I was still just a kid. I didn't understand yet that curiosity could have real consequences. So I decided I wouldn't sleep. I was going to find out what was going on. Before leaving the room, my grandparents told us they were going to lock the door, and if we needed anything, we should call out to them. We all nodded, and after they left and closed the door, I waited. Waited for my brother and sister to fall asleep so I could get up and sneak out the window. I was a well-behaved kid, but only because I was really good at hiding my mischief. I'd climbed out that window plenty of times before while playing around the house. My grandparents just didn't know I could do it. I'll admit, I was nervous opening that window. Not so much because of the gap between the window and the tree, or the risk of slipping, but because of the dark. The night was pitch black. The moon was barely out, and not even the usual forest sounds were there. Everything was still. Curiosity got the better of me, so I worked up the courage, climbed out the window, jumped to the tree, and slid down as quietly as I could. Once I was on the ground, I crept over to the living room window and looked inside. I saw my grandparents. My grandma was sitting on the couch facing my grandpa, who was leaning against the opposite window with the shotgun in hand, staring hard into the darkness. In that moment, I realized I'd messed up bad. This was serious. They were in a defensive stance. Something was wrong, and it wasn't fun anymore. I thought about climbing back up the tree and into the room, but I didn't get the chance. After that, everything went to hell. Like I said before, I know what I did was stupid, the kind of mistake that comes with consequences you can never take back. But I was a kid. And believe me when I say, I still blame myself for everything that happened next. I know I was stubborn and childish. I know I should have listened to my grandparents. Out of nowhere, I heard something behind me and didn't even have time to react. Too fast for me to process or respond. Something grabbed me from behind and covered my mouth to keep me from screaming. I couldn't see what it was, but I know it was big, and its hands were damp and disgusting. My grandparents heard it too. They'd heard the sound from the woods. My grandfather was already at the other window, eyes wide, looking right at me. My grandma was crying as she ran for the back door. What happened after is a blur in my memory. Panic took over everything. But I remember being dragged toward the woods. I remember hearing a gunshot. I remember a strange, guttural scream coming from whatever was dragging me. I remember feeling a sharp pain in my left arm and hitting the ground hard. I remember seeing a dark figure leap over me and vanish into the trees. I remember my grandma grabbing me tight and pulling me back toward the cabin. And I remember my grandpa, shotgun still in hand, running after that thing, into the thick forest. That was the last time anyone ever saw him. My parents arrived early the next morning, before sunrise. I was taken straight to the hospital, where they found out I had a broken arm. The police weren't called until 2 days later, when it became clear to my family that Grandpa wasn't coming back. That something had happened to him out in those woods. For a week, they combed the forest with search teams and volunteers. But they didn't find anything. No tracks, no clues, no sign of him at all. My grandfather was never seen again. My parents pressed me and my grandma for months. They wanted answers. They wanted to understand what had happened that night. But eventually they gave up. Neither of us ever said more than they already knew. Neither of us could explain what happened. I never got another chance to talk to my grandma about it, because less than a year later, she died of a heart attack. The cabin was inherited by my dad, but he never went back. None of us did. Now that we're adults, my siblings sometimes bring up that week and ask questions. But I don't have answers. Not for them. Not even for myself. I can't explain why I was so stubborn that night. I don't know what grabbed me. I don't know if it was a man or something else entirely. I really don't have answers. I was born in Bluefield, West Virginia, and spent most of my life close to the mountains, surrounded by that thick forest air and the slow hum of the Appalachian hills. My childhood was a happy one, filled with days of laughter and exploration, alongside my mother, my father, and my twin brother. We spent endless hours playing together, wandering through the woods. And even though I remember that sometimes strange things would happen, things that might have seemed scary to a child, I still think back on those times with a kind of deep, aching fondness, like a warm memory hidden in the shadows. My father's side of the family owned some old land up on the slopes near McDowell County. And it was the kind of place steeped in history, mines long since abandoned, thick woods that seemed to stretch forever, and air so still it felt like time had stopped there. When we were teenagers, my brother and I would head up there all the time. Sometimes we brought friends, but a lot of times it was just the two of us, like it was our own private kingdom in the middle of nowhere. It felt like a second home, untouched, quiet, and completely ours. But once college started, and life began to pile on, with work and relationships and the slow building of families, we started spending less and less time there, until eventually, we just stopped going altogether. I hadn't set foot there in 6 years, and my brother hadn't been back in probably 8. In 2017, after a rough divorce that left me drained and needing to clear my head, I decided to take some time for myself. A little solo retreat into the old family property. My brother, knowing full well how much I needed the escape, but also knowing I might end up sitting there brooding, decided he'd come along for a couple weeks. He figured he could spare that much time, and after that, well, we'd just see how things went. The cabin sits way out, isolated deep in the woods. There are other old structures in the area, but they've all been abandoned for years. It's about a 20-minute drive from War, and then another 55-minute hike through thick woods, no roads, no cell service, and no power. Back in the day, the cabin had 2 generators, but we hadn't been out there in so long we didn't even know what kind of shape it would be in when we arrived. The drive there was peaceful, and my brother and I caught up like no time had passed. We laughed, swapped stories, and speculated about what kind of wreck the cabin might have become. We both knew it wouldn't be in great shape, but we definitely weren't prepared for how bad it really was. It looked like the forest had started swallowing it whole the moment we stopped coming around. There were vines and creeping plants all over, insects and nests tucked into every corner, and this eerie sense that the land had finally decided to take back what was always rightfully its own. It was beautiful in a haunting way, and I couldn't help but wonder who had invaded first. Was it us, bringing our roads and cabins and mining towns into the heart of the forest? Or was it the forest that was now reclaiming us? Anyway, I was knee-deep in those kinds of thoughts. Moody, quiet, reflective, the way I usually get when life knocks me around. When Peach, my brother's dog, let out a sharp bark that pulled me right back to reality. Now, my brother has always had this deep connection to animals, and Peach had been with him for about 5 years. He was a rescue from an illegal fighting ring, found half broken and terrified in a shelter where my brother volunteered. Nobody could get near him, and he wouldn't let a soul touch him, until my brother did. He saw something in Peach worth saving, and under his care, Peach slowly became the gentlest dog you could ever meet. That's why he got his name, because under all that muscle and size, he was just a sweetheart. He rarely ever barked. So when Peach did bark, especially the way he was barking now, loud, fierce, and unrelenting, my brother took it seriously. He always said Peach had this sixth sense, like some kind of omen. He was barking toward the back of the cabin, near the entrance to one of those old sealed-off mine shafts. That entrance had always creeped us out, even as kids. It was pitch black, like it just swallowed light. And not once had either of us, or anyone we'd ever brought up there, dared to go near it. So, when Peach started going nuts in that direction, we both tensed up. It felt like confirmation of something we'd always quietly believed. That whatever was back there, it was better left alone. Eventually, my brother managed to calm Peach down, and we got back to assessing the cabin. We both knew we wanted to try restoring it, bring a little life back to the place. But in its current state, it wasn't fit to sleep in, not for the first few nights. We debated sleeping in the car, but that would have been miserable, so we agreed on buying a tent. Since the car was his, he went to town to pick one up, and I stayed behind with Peach. He said he'd be gone a few hours, which gave me time to properly go through the cabin and figure out what needed fixing first. I was in the back room when I heard Peach growling. I rushed out to find him at the front door, hackles raised, body stiff and low to the ground, staring straight at the entrance like he was preparing for a fight. I tried to calm him while peeking outside, expecting maybe a bear or a fox. But there was nothing. Just the same eerie silence and the endless trees. Still, throughout the morning and into early afternoon, Peach kept slipping into these episodes. Calm 1 minute, then stiff and growling the next, like he was reacting to something I couldn't see. When my brother returned, I told him everything, and he said it could be the smells, the wilderness, the scent of wild animals. Peach had never really been exposed to deep forest like this, living most of his life in a city apartment. It made sense, and it calmed me a bit, at least enough to try to enjoy the evening. That night, we pitched the tent just outside the cabin, found a patch of solid ground for the stakes, started a small fire, and cooked something simple while trying to relax. But Peach wasn't having it. He stayed on edge, ears twitching, muscles tense, and eyes always scanning. We both knew we wouldn't sleep well if he kept that up. And as it turned out, we didn't even make it to bedtime. Around 11:30 p.m., we heard a noise from the trees. Something heavy, like a foot snapping a branch. We both turned immediately, and there, crouched between the trees, was a person. I reached for the pistol I always carry and called out, asking who they were. Peach didn't bark. He didn't make a sound, but his entire body pointed toward the figure like an arrow. His hair was standing straight up, and if he hadn't been leashed, I swear he would have launched himself into the trees. The person, seeing the gun, stood up slowly, turned, and disappeared into the darkness without a word. That should have been enough to send us packing, but we still weren't entirely sure what we were dealing with. And there was something about it that didn't feel immediate, at least not yet. So we decided to sleep inside the cabin. It was rough, but the door and windows still worked, and it felt safer than a tent out in the open. What happened next was without a doubt one of the most terrifying things I've ever experienced. I woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of Peach growling, low, deliberate, like he was trying not to be heard. I got up and followed his gaze to the window that faced the mine entrance. In the faint moonlight, I could just barely make out 5 figures walking through the woods, carrying someone who was clearly fighting back. The person was gagged, but I could still hear muffled cries, and they were thrashing, desperate, panicked. My first instinct was to grab my phone and call the police. But when I turned, I saw another man pressed up against the opposite window, staring in. He looked filthy, like he hadn't bathed in weeks, with wild eyes and a face caked in dirt. Peach lunged at the window with a snarl that rattled the glass, and the man stumbled back into the darkness. I grabbed my gun, my phone, and screamed for my brother to wake up. We had to leave now. He didn't even ask questions. He grabbed the keys, his own pistol, and gave Peach the command to follow. We tore out of the cabin. There were 2 more figures near the car, shadowed and silent. I couldn't see their faces clearly, but I aimed my weapon and shouted for them to back off. Thank God Peach was trained. Any other dog might have run straight at them. We jumped in and sped off. My brother tearing through that gravel road like his life depended on it, while I told him what I'd seen. Those people, that poor man, the group dragging him into the mine. Whatever they were planning, it couldn't have been good. As soon as I had even a flicker of cell service, I called the police and told them everything. The next day, a team was sent out. They told us there was definitely evidence of people living out there. Remains of meals, waste, and a sick, delirious man found near the mine. But that was it. No other people. No explanations. We never got any more answers. We don't know if that man talked, if he was arrested, or even if the police believed half of what we said. They stopped updating us, and we never went back to that cabin. I've heard the stories about feral people in the Appalachians, about strange communities deep in the mountains where no one ever goes. But I don't know what we found. I don't know if it was that, or just some nomadic group living off the grid. To be honest, I don't care. All I want to know is what they did to that man, and I don't think I'll ever get an answer.